Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. We got some unexpected information regarding the middleweight division. Israel Adesanya versus Sean Strickland may very well end up being the main event of UFC 293 in Australia. Israel Adesanya basically put out a video saying, this is the next fight for me. This is what's happening. Du Plessis turned the fight down. We're going to look at the middleweight title picture. We're going to discuss the possibilities because this is not official yet. This is not 100% confirmed. We're going to discuss how I think there's a chance Israel Adesanya could end up fighting at UFC 293 and not end up fighting Strickland or Du Plessis. And also, the more I think about the middleweight title picture, I think there's a chance if Dricus Du Plessis does not fight Israel Adesanya at UFC 293, Du Plessis could lose his middleweight title shot altogether. So you go back to UFC 290 a couple weeks ago, you had Robert Whittaker versus Dricus Du Plessis. Dricus pulls off the most unexpected performance of 2023 and honestly of the last couple years in my opinion, and he finishes Robert Whittaker in the second round. Now the second the referee was pulling Dricus Du Plessis off of Robert Whittaker's dead body, people were already thinking, oh, Adesanya versus Du Plessis, that's going to be a good matchup. That's going to go down at UFC 293 because Dana White already said in advance, look, the winner of this fight is going to fight Adesanya. Adesanya's fighting at 293 in September. So as long as they come out unscathed, that's the main event we're getting. It was a foregone conclusion. Everyone assumed we're getting Adesanya versus Du Plessis. They had the stare down in the cage afterwards. And then 2 days ago, Adesanya comes out with a video and says, basically, Du Plessis has a foot injury. He's turning down the fight. He doesn't want to fight me. And instead, I'm going to fight Sean Strickland because I am staying on the card at UFC 293 in Australia. Now, before we get into my reaction to this news, I want to put it this way. This is not confirmed. I know I've said that multiple times. And also, even though Adesanya is a good source, for all we know, he's trying to put the pressure on Du Plessis to accept the fight. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes. It also could be Adesanya just trying to control the narrative and make Du Plessis look like he's ducking him, even though that's not the case. But let's take it on its face value. Let's say Du Plessis does have a foot injury. Let's say he's not willing to take the fight at 293. What is my reaction to this news? I'm disappointed, to be quite honest. I'm very disappointed because I know a lot of people were excited for Israel Adesanya versus Dricus Du Plessis because, oh, who breathes more African air in the whole racial and ethnicity debate and nationality? And for me, I didn't care about that buildup. I hated that buildup. But for me, what was so interesting is, as bad as Dricus Du Plessis has looked in certain fights in terms of a technical skill set, this guy has unbelievable heart and he has absolutely no quit in him. And if anyone could pull off the upset of a lifetime against Israel Adesanya, it could be Du Plessis. And Du Plessis has power. He's a big middleweight. He has good, decent grappling. He has good jiu-jitsu and submission ability. And he'll go out there, and he's not going to pull a Jared Cannonier where he's just standing in front of him scared to take any risk in the fight. Du Plessis was going to go out there and take the fight to Israel Adesanya, win or lose. So for me, that's what made me so interested in this fight, because if Du Plessis can defeat Robert Whittaker, all bets are off. I've been talking about it nonstop. All bets are off. If Du Plessis can beat Robert Whittaker, Du Plessis could beat Israel Adesanya. And that's, for me, what made this fight so compelling, not the whole racial buildup that a lot of people were latching onto. So for me, I'm very disappointed in this. But it's not unexpected because to have that quick of a turnaround, it's really not fair to the fighters. I talked about it with Aljamain Sterling. I talked about it in the lead up to Whittaker versus Du Plessis. How, you're fighting in early July. Now you want to turn around and have them fight in early September. That's 2 months time to turn around, get in a training camp. They just came off a training camp. It's really not fair in general to expect that. 3, 4 months, 5 months, okay. Even 3 months is cutting it too much. But 2 months, 8 weeks, and we knew this when Dana White initially announced it. So if Du Plessis is injured, I think a lot of people are going to say, oh, not a lot of people, but I think there's going to be a portion of Adesanya's fan base who's going to say, oh, Du Plessis is ducking him. Du Plessis is scared of Adesanya. That is not the case. Do I wish Du Plessis would take the fight? Yes. But at the same time, I want him at 100%. If he is in fact injured in any capacity, I do not want him to fight at UFC 293 because I don't want those built-in excuses. Whoever, this can be any fight. It doesn't have to be Adesanya Du Plessis. I hate when a fighter goes into a fight injured and then afterwards they're like, oh, I was injured. That's why I lost. Well, then you shouldn't have took the fight. And I know the UFC tends to try to pressure these guys to take fights even when they're injured. And that's why I don't think Du Plessis is completely off the table for Adesanya. But if it does end up happening like this, I'm very disappointed because Adesanya versus Du Plessis was a fresh matchup in the middleweight title picture. And I just thought it was a compelling style matchup. And the way Du Plessis just blew through Robert Whittaker and made him quit in the fight, I thought, imagine if he can pull that off against Israel Adesanya. And then you add the layer of the build-up that I think a lot of fans were excited for. But then you go and you look at Israel Adesanya versus Sean Strickland, because that's the most sensible matchup, even though it doesn't make a crazy amount of sense. If you look at the middleweight title picture right now, who else is going to fight him? Alex Pereira's moving up to light heavyweight, fighting next week. Robert Whittaker's already lost to Adesanya twice, coming off a loss to Dricus Du Plessis. Jarrett Cannonier just lost to Adesanya, last July. Marvin Vettori's already lost to him twice. Paulo Costa has a fight coming up with Khamzat Chimaev, and he already got starched by Adesanya a couple years back. Then you're at Derek Brunson, Roman Dolidze, and Jack Hermanson. None of those make sense. So if you look at the division right now, the only fight that makes sense outside of Dricus Du Plessis is Sean Strickland. Now, Sean Strickland's coming off a win over Abus Magomedov, where he finished him in the second round. Abus completely gassed. Fight before that, he beat Nasruddin Imavov on short notice. Fight before that, he lost to Jarrett Cannonier, split decision. Fight could have won either way. Fight before that, he got KO'd by Alex Pereira. Now, Strickland's 2-2 in his last 4, but at the same time, there's nobody else. And I know a lot of people are saying, I've seen a lot of people say, oh, I'm really excited. I love this build-up, and this build-up's going to be great. And imagine the stuff Strickland's going to say. And that may very well be true. Strickland's going to say some crazy stuff if this fight does come to fruition. But, and this is getting into an early prediction, I don't think this fight's competitive. Sean Strickland's good, don't get me wrong, but I don't think there's any way he beats Israel Adesanya. And I know in MMA, anything can happen. Strickland has okay power. He doesn't have one-punch KO power. Look at Alex Pereira. Alex Pereira, unbelievable power. Strickland's not going to go out there and grapple. And Strickland doesn't even have the greatest footwork. He kind of plots forward. He has decent striking, and he has decent power, and he kind of busts guys up. But even in the first round against Abus Magomedov, he was losing that first round. He was getting, teep kicks to the body nonstop, nasty leg kicks, getting clipped with big shots. Adesanya is not going to gas out. So for me, I'm not only just disappointed we don't get the Dricus matchup very soon, I'm also disappointed because honestly, Israel Adesanya versus Sean Strickland, in my opinion, is a throwaway matchup. Strickland's tough, he's durable, maybe he ekes out to a decision, but I think Adesanya wins. I don't know where Strickland threatens Adesanya. Unless he clips him with a big shot, maybe Adesanya's chin's completely gone, which there's no real evidence to support that. How does Strickland win this fight? He's not going to grapple. He's shown he's not willing to grapple. He got KO'd by Alex Pereira. Alex Pereira just got KO'd by Israel Adesanya. And I know MMA math doesn't always work, but styles make fights. Sean Strickland is primarily a striker. Israel Adesanya is primarily a striker. This fight's going to be contested on the feet. I don't think it's competitive. I think Adesanya is leaps and bounds better than Sean Strickland on the feet. And I think you'll see Israel Adesanya light him up on the feet with kicks, leg kick him because Strickland's very heavy on that lead leg. Now, don't get me wrong. Strickland is very durable, gritty, has good stamina. But have we ever seen Israel Adesanya gas out? We saw him in a tough, grueling matchup with Alex Pereira at UFC 281 where he eventually got finished in the 5th round. He didn't start to get tired there. So I don't see him gassing out and getting finished by Strickland. I think Adesanya wins that fight 10 times out of 10. Probably 99 out of 100 times unless there's some type of injury. So that's also a reason why I'm disappointed. And I think a lot of fans are just getting behind the matchup because they're like, oh, the trash talk in the lead up is going to be really good. That doesn't interest me. That's just my opinion. The trash talk between two guys, saying weird stuff and cringy stuff doesn't amuse me at all. Don't care about it in the least bit. But does Sean Strickland actually end up stepping in? Sean Strickland was asked about this in an interview. And basically, he's in negotiations right now. He's in negotiations with the UFC to fight Israel Adesanya. And Sean Strickland better be getting paid very, very well because he just fought on July 1st. So he fought a week before Du Plessis. So he better be getting paid big for this fight because otherwise he could take another fight in the meantime, in 3, 4, 5 months and potentially still get his title shot in the future. But if he's going to take it on essentially, 7, 8 weeks notice, he better be getting paid significantly. And he essentially alluded to that. Look, the UFC is going to have to pay me well if I take this fight against Israel Adesanya, you know. And Strickland is a guy that as long as you give him a decent paycheck, he'll step in. He stepped in against Nasruddin Imavov a month after he lost to Jared Cannonier. He fought Abus Magomedov, who was unranked. So Strickland is willing to take any and all challenges. You just have to make sure the paycheck is right. And it's a middleweight title shot. So that could lead to even more money if he was able to dethrone Israel Adesanya, which would be one of the craziest performances ever if Sean Strickland went out there and beat Israel Adesanya. But ultimately, does this fight happen? I think there's a decent percentage chance that it does happen, but I wouldn't be so sure yet because Dricus Du Plessis has been radio silent. He hasn't come out and said, look, I'm sorry, guys. I would love to fight, but I'm dealing with these lingering injuries. It may be one of those things where Du Plessis told the UFC, look, I'm going to see a doctor in a week. Let me see what they say about this and how it's going to heal up. And then let me decide. Give me a couple days, let me process this. I just beat Robert Whittaker. Let me process this, and then I will decide. And then you can look at other, potential fights. And meanwhile, because the UFC is just the way the UFC is, they're going to go to Strickland and start setting up that fight as a backup plan, just so they have it in their back pocket if Du Plessis comes back to them and says, look, I can't do it. I went to the doctor. He says it's not going to heal up in time. It's not going to be right, so I'm not going to take this fight on 6 weeks, 7 weeks notice with an injured foot. So don't count it out that Israel Adesanya versus Dricus Du Plessis doesn't happen. Adesanya may have very well just put out this video to put pressure on Du Plessis to accept the fight. We haven't heard from Du Plessis, his manager, his coach, or anything. But what do I think ultimately happens? Oh, man, this is tough to guess because I just feel like when I think of Dricus Du Plessis, I just felt like no matter what, I don't care if he has a broken arm, I thought he would take that fight at 293. And I think people are going to pretend like Du Plessis ducking Adesanya. That's not even remotely true. To ask a guy to make an 8-week turnaround is just completely unfair. So if he does decide not to take this fight, I don't think it's a bad decision at all. It might be a smart decision depending on how the middleweight division plays out, which we'll talk about in a second. But if I had to nail down what actually happens, I'm going to say, and I'm not super confident in this because honestly, it could go either way. I'm going to say Du Plessis ends up fighting Adesanya at 293. I'm going to say it ends up happening. But another fight that is real potential to happen, and I know this sounds crazy, but the UFC's done crazier things. Let's say Sean Strickland, the negotiations aren't going well. The UFC doesn't like when fighters challenge them and try to get a massive paycheck. So let's say Strickland doesn't work out, and let's say Du Plessis is injured and can't fight. Well, there's another belt that's up for grabs right now and doesn't have a fight. And guess what that is? That's the light heavyweight belt. There's not a fight. Jamal Hill injured. Yuri Prochazka coming off an injury. There's not a whole lot of options. The UFC would not shock me. Could we get Israel Adesanya moving up to 205 versus Yuri Prochazka for the belt at UFC 293? Israel Adesanya has said and maintained that he wants to be a two-weight champion. So that is kind of a wild card. I don't think that's particularly super likely to happen. I would have thought it was more likely to happen a couple months ago when they booked the Whittaker Du Plessis fight because I thought that's way too close to 293. Maybe they're planning something else. But don't be surprised if that comes out of left field and shocks you guys that we end up getting Israel Adesanya versus Yuri Prochazka for the light heavyweight belt that is now vacated by Jamal Hill with the Achilles injury. Don't be surprised. But if I had to guess, I'm going to say it shocks us. I'm going to say we get Adesanya versus Du Plessis anyway at UFC 293. I feel like Du Plessis, regardless if he's dealing with some lingering injuries, I think he takes the fight. But if he doesn't take the fight, which I don't blame him at all, he may lose his middleweight title shot altogether because UFC 293 is in early September. UFC 294 is in late October. So, 6 weeks prior or 6 weeks after UFC 293, you have UFC 294. The co-main event of UFC 294 is Paulo Costa versus Khamzat Chimaev. If Khamzat Chimaev beats Paulo Costa, and he beats him, let's say he goes out there and finishes him in the first round, finishes him in the second round, and Israel Adesanya is fighting Strickland at 293, Adesanya beats Strickland, I think the UFC does Adesanya versus Chimaev. And I know people are going to say, oh no, they're going to do it. Adesanya versus Du Plessis, they got all this backstory about the African stuff. And honestly, the UFC, if they wanted to put Adesanya versus Du Plessis together, they could have put it together before even making the Whittaker fight. And you look at those two fighters, who's the draw in that matchup? Adesanya is the draw, okay? And who's a bigger draw, Du Plessis or Khamzat Chimaev? It's Khamzat Chimaev. And if Khamzat Chimaev beats Paulo Costa, he has a legitimate claim to a middleweight title shot. Now, I personally think Du Plessis would deserve the middleweight title shot more. Obviously, he's been in the middleweight division. He's on a long winning streak. He's undefeated in the UFC. He just beat Robert Whittaker, so I think Du Plessis has earned it, and I would be a little bit annoyed that Khamzat Chimaev would leapfrog him. But if he beats Paulo Costa, he has a win in the top 10. The UFC, look what they did with Alex Pereira. They just kind of, gifted him a path to the middleweight title shot against Adesanya because of that backstory there. And Israel Adesanya versus Khamzat Chimaev would be a mega fight for the UFC. Especially, let's say Adesanya goes out there and finishes Strickland, and then Khamzat goes out there and finishes Paulo Costa. That fight would be massive. It would do well over 1 million pay-per-view buys. And I think the fans, if meanwhile Du Plessis is sitting on the sidelines and you get Khamzat with this spectacular performance against a top 10 middleweight, I think the fans will start to change. And I think the fans will say, oh, we won Adesanya versus Khamzat Chimaev. And then so if that happens, you're looking at that fight not happening till early 2024 because they're fighting in September and October respectively, Adesanya and Chimaev. So that fight's not happening until next year, early 2024 at best, maybe spring 2024. So then they fight, depending on how that fight plays out, you could have a rematch, but let's say for the sake of argument, Adesanya beats Chimaev. Du Plessis is going to wait until summer, fall of 2024 for a title shot. He's going to sit out for a full year waiting for his opportunity against Israel Adesanya. So if he doesn't want to wait, which maybe he will, maybe he won't, if he doesn't want to wait, then you have the point where he's going to have to take another fight. And you never know, in MMA, you never know what's going to happen. Anybody can win on any given night. And Du Plessis could just end up losing his shot altogether because he doesn't want to wait. He doesn't want to sit out and wait. And even so, if Adesanya fights Chimaev, let's say he takes a lot of damage in that fight. He pulls off the win, but he takes a lot of damage. Then he could be sitting out till the end of 2024. Or let's say Chimaev beats Adesanya. You could see an immediate rematch because that's going to be a massive fight depending on how it plays out. So there's so many variables. But if Du Plessis does not fight at UFC 293, do not be surprised if we do not see Du Plessis fighting for a title in the next 8 months because it may end up being Adesanya versus Chimaev. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And thank you so much for watching.